I intend to start at 8:34. One more minute. Okay. My iPhone time is 8:34, so it's time to get going. Welcome. This is the Washington County Development Forum. I am Andy Back. I'm the Planning and Development Services Manager. And we do these forums twice a year. So generally in April and October. Our next one is October 28th. You'll learn more about that as the date gets closer. I don't know if Stephen Roberts is here, but I want to mention him. He's the Director of Land Use and Transportation. So he welcomes you also. Let me talk briefly about the Development Forum purpose. First off, it's to share information that we have that may be new to you on development-related services. It's also to hear from you on things that you may know going on in the industry and or things that you have questions about in interacting with the Department of Land Use and Transportation, and more specifically Planning and Development Services. And the last thing, which I think is the most important, but maybe is a little bit hard to do in these COVID-y times, is build relationships. That I say this every time, but when we're in the midst of permitting, things can get intense at times. People have different objectives in mind, and we recognize that, but we believe that the process goes a lot smoother if we can develop the relationships sort of outside of the process. So I would like to hand you all a muffin and a cup of coffee, but I can't do that today, but who knows, maybe in October we'll be at that point. Let me talk a little bit about the agenda for today. I'm gonna introduce Matt Craigie and have him tell us a little bit about his new position. The county now has an economic development manager, which is new. Brian Dorlin, one of our senior building inspectors, is going to talk about View Specs, which is a video inspection service that we have, which we're just getting started, which we think will save us time and money and hopefully save you time and money occasionally. It's not going to be used all the time. Brian will go over that. Teresa Cherniak will talk about middle housing, the ordinances we're going to be doing over the next year to implement House Bill 2001. Then I'm going to talk a little bit just sort of about the staff service impacts, some reductions, just sort of the status of our budget, and give you an update on that. So with that, unless there's questions, on the agenda, we have listed activities and staff updates for me to talk about. I think I'm just going to wait till 9:30 and kind of integrate that into that discussion. So with that, it's the Matt Craigie show, which hopefully I pronounced correctly. So I'll turn it over to Matt and let him talk about himself and his new role.
Great, thank you, Andy. Good morning, everyone. Appreciate the airtime here with this important group. So yeah, my name is Matt. I'm the new EDM here at the county. This is the first time the county has had this role. They've coordinated economic development work with folks outside of the county, consultants and whatnot in the past, and the county brought this position in-house to do a few things that I'll talk about today. My background, so you know, I am a land use real estate kind of person. Worked both in the public sector as a planner, and then also I've spent about the past 9 years in the private sector doing consulting, specifically around actually the relationship between the private sector and the public sector and land use. So most recently I've been with Echo Northwest, where my role was to lead up a lot of the economic development work. I did plenty of market analyses for all different types of real estate, whether residential, commercial of all flavors, retail, employment lands type of work, things like that. So very familiar with the issues and challenges and the intersection between the needs and the demands of private development, and aligning those with community goals and land use, and how those pieces come together. So I can talk pro forma with you if you want to talk pro forma. Happy to do that, and looking forward to building the relationship with you all, and also with land use and transportation. So I just have a few bullet points here just to talk about the role here, my role, and what I'm working on and trying to build out here at the county. So the county brought this role in-house to do a few different things. So one of them is, of course, to convene and coordinate economic development policy with partners across the county. So thinking about countywide issues and how the county can be a productive facilitator to address some of those challenges. What does that look like now? Right now, I'm spending a lot of my time doing COVID economic recovery work. So you're going to be hearing more about this very soon. The county is getting organized around the American Rescue Plan Act dollars that are coming our way, but then also going to local cities and to the state and to federal agencies. And so we're working to try to coordinate all of those things. So within the economic development space, I'm helping to convene some of those conversations with local partners. What this role looks like around the kind of convening space going forward is something that we're going to keep working on. Again, because this position is new, I'm intentionally creating a short-term work plan with the thought that we would move to a strategy maybe next year or at a later point, where we would have a much more robust process and work with stakeholders both within the county and outside of the county, including private sector, to help think about the role of the county and how we can be most effective in the economic development space. One of the other reasons why this position got brought in-house is the recognition that some of the smaller cities, and especially the unincorporated areas across Washington County, don't have the economic development representation that some of the larger cities do. So while I'm working hand in hand with folks in Beaverton and Hillsborough, they have wonderful staff that already have great networks and are doing good economic development work. And so I would like to coordinate with them, but then also provide more technical assistance to places like Banks and Gaston and Cornelius and Aloha and Bethany and Cedar Mill areas that don't have either staff at all or the staff capacity to do economic development work. What that looks like is we're gonna keep figuring that out, and I think it's going to look a little bit different in each area. As you know, each one of these areas is diverse in population, diverse in economy, diverse in geography. And so the needs of each one of those places is going to look a little bit different. But I'm, kind of advancing those conversations with each one of those communities. And so, to give you an example right now, I'm, working with King City on the Kingston Terrace Master Plan by being part of an advisory committee. I'm working closely with folks in Banks with some more specific projects that they want to put in place and they want to get going. So again, it's going to look a little bit different, but we're working out how we can best support those areas that until now haven't had that support around economic development at the county level. And the last piece here is to help lend an economic development perspective and assistance and work cooperatively with other offices and departments across the county. And so land use and transportation, of course, there's a lot of overlap here with economic development. So Andy and Stephen and Chris and team, we're going to be meeting and talking about what that looks like going forward here. But I do have experience doing this type of work on urban growth boundary expansions and Bend, thinking about funding and finance and how transportation finance can be worked out so that things are still market feasible at the end of the day. How do you kind of get through that those kind of tricky financial puzzles, things like that. So looking forward to exploring those conversations both with departments and then also productively with private partners like yourselves. So next slide, please. Thank you. There's my silly face here. I guess this is just a plug to go ahead and give me a call. I think I'd love to hear from you all. I'm doing a lot of kind of get to know you calls right now. I think I'm looking at the participant list. I recognize some of those names, but I don't know everybody. Again, we're building this office within the county, and so it is absolutely essential that we understand the needs and challenges of our partners like yourselves. And so I do welcome an email or a call, and I'd love to hear about what you're working on and the challenges that you're facing right now, and want to kind of foster that collaboration with you all. So that's my kind of 5-minute plug for what we're doing in economic development. And I think, Andy, if I'm right, we have a little bit of time here in the schedule for me to take some preliminary questions.
That's correct. We're doing fine time-wise. So if you want to hit Matt up with some questions, I think now would be a good time.
Or should they do questions, Andy? Are you looking for questions in the chat, or can people just unmute?
Let me see here.
sure there's some questions out there.
Andy, participants can raise their hand. Sorry, I thought I was.
There's one I see.
Who's got the feedback? Okay, so I see a question from David. It says, "Hi Matt, when will you have a priorities shortlist for Washington County economic development?" That's a great question. In terms of a priority shortlist, so how am I going to use my own limited time and go after priorities? David, the answer to your question is I'm working right now, like I mentioned, on the kind of 1-year work plan. And within the work plan is going to advance a few ideas about how we might do economic development and how we can work with partners to get going. Again, I really think it takes a more robust strategy process to kind of fully define kind of what we're doing there, because I want to make sure that we're having a conversation with folks like yourselves and embedding that input into how we go about doing the work. That being said, there's a lot of work that needs to get done right now, and so I'm developing the work plan, and that is something that I will be sharing publicly, and would be happy to talk with you all about that. A little preview of the priority shortlist and how I'm spending my time right now. A lot of it is COVID economic recovery focused. So again, we have the ARPA dollars that are coming in, and I'm trying to work with again, partners within and outside of the county to think about how those can be best deployed strategically and to the most impact. So good question. Another one. All right, so another anonymous attendee says, "Do you expect to be able to lower permitting costs with the rising material costs to help private development?" That's a question that I'm gonna have to work with all of my friends here on LUT, and they're the ones that are in charge of that. I think that we do need to recognize that that inflation is a thing, and as I've had some conversations with folks across the county, it sounds like construction costs are actually really taking off. If you're heard double digits for things like wood and other basic supplies. So definitely hearing that concern across the board in the development community. But to answer your question about the permits, that's something we'd have to talk to with LUT. So
I would add that as part of my chat at 9:30. I'll talk a little bit about costs, permitting costs. So
great, thanks, Andy.
If you guys also would like to use the raise your hand function, we can unmute you to ask the question as well.
Another question from Karen in the chat box. So, will you be reaching out specifically to historically underserved communities? Another terrific question. I would like to be thinking about how we can be quite thoughtful about how we're engaging with all of the communities across Washington County. And I think that in general, government struggles to connect with historically underserved communities. And so I recognize that it takes a strong network and building relationships with community organizations to be able to access those communities and have productive conversations. And so, Karen, one thing that I've been trying to do here over the past my first few weeks here at the county is to reach out to community-based organizations that have those connections and represent those communities, and have an open conversation with them about how the county can be a better partner. So to give you an example around the economic recovery work, I worked with Adelante Mujeres and the SBDC out of PCC to have a CBO event 2 weeks ago that was focused on community-based organizations that help small and micro businesses, many of which are culturally specific organizations. And I like to look for more opportunities to have inclusive tables like that, where we can address some of the challenges that are being felt by all of the communities across Washington County. So that's definitely a priority. And then when we get to a strategy, we definitely do need to be thinking about an equity lens and how we are conducting work in the economic development space at the county in a way that addresses systemic inequities and promotes a more inclusive future. So great question, and it's something that we're definitely thinking about.
Other questions for Matt? Going once, going twice. Okay, well, thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
We'll have you back again in the future.
Great, sounds good.
We're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is a good thing. But we're just going to go for it. And so Brian Dorland is next up. He's going to talk about our new video inspection service.
Hey everybody, welcome to the forum. I have put a little video together to demonstrate what view specs is for us right at the moment. One item I did notice during the video that I did not bring out very well is scheduling of inspections hasn't changed, but one item as far as leaving phone numbers, there is a inspection contact place to put in, and that is a number that will make it very helpful for us to do these video inspections. So at this point, if Michael would start the video, we can go from there. Hi, I'm Brian Dorland with Washington County Building Inspections. I am one of the senior structural mechanical inspectors here. I am going to be doing a short demonstration of a new tool that we are rolling out to help with inspections. It's called View Specs. It will be a virtual inspection with a contractor on site that we take temporary access to the phone to be able to perform simple re-inspections or some first-time inspections of easy items that an inspector would feel comfortable doing. At this time, it is a inspector's choice-based tool where the inspector will get his route, and if he knows that this is a re-inspect he's been to, he would reach out to the contractor, find out if they'd be on site, and be able to reach out and do it with this new tool. How that works is we send out a push notification that goes to the contractor as a text message. The contractor will accept the text, allow us certain options on phones, and depending on the type of phone that the contractor has, we may even have access to zoom in to see something, maybe turn the flashlight on so that we can see things better. But it all kind of depends on the model of a phone and stuff. But at the basic, it actually works as a camera, so we can ask you to move around to show things. Today, I'm going to be using one of my fellow inspectors, Jeff Seil, our senior plumbing inspector, as my contractor on site, and I'm going to reach out to him. So here you go. I'm going to share a screen and show a small demonstration of how this works. So, basically, I'll have a phone number that was already given to me as a contact, and I use that, and I just start the inspection, and the process for the push notification starts to go out to the contractor. One item is a feature that we have is when this phone is picked up, it does give us a geo notification of the location so that we can verify on a mapping system that the contractor is actually at the home that we're having the inspection happen. and we can verify that it is the area without actually being there. So I'm waiting for a contractor to receive and give me access to their phone. And here we go right now. Hi, Jeff. So I have Jeff out on a site right now and to use as a demonstration. Some of the things that help with the inspection, I can ask the contractor to rotate their phone so that it comes through as a landscape mode, and it helps me see more area at one time. I would be able to point out items and have them go closer in the, like in the one we have showing right now. I can have him, there's a beam going down the center of the garage there, Jeff, that looks like on the far wall right in front of us that we are missing some bearing underneath of this beam. So if this would be like a correction that I would need to show him if he didn't completely understand, I have the capability of marking this picture up and saying, you know, the area that there's the issue. And I can send this back to the contractor as a picture with a little comment, you know, saying something like missing post. And I send this out. It will end up, when I send it, it'll go back through as a text to the contractor. He can see that item. During this video right now, Jeff, you guys cannot hear Jeff speak. Sorry about that, but I can hear him, and so he'll let me know when the photo comes through. And he's telling me right now that he has received it, so he knows exactly where I'm talking about and what's needed to be done. And that photo actually is recorded in the inspection system on our side, so that if the next inspection, a follow-up inspector can actually bring up the photo and know, oh, this is what was still needed to be done. I can ask Jeff to just slowly pan around a room looking for anything else. On some phones, I do have the capability, like I said, to turn flashlights on, zoom, but at any time I can freeze a screen and get up close, see what the hangers call out, you know, all these things that may only be a simple correction and nothing, you know, we're not going to be wasting time running out to small little corrections that had to be completed before we could move forward on a project. So at this time, I would just like to say thank you for watching the video, and look forward to trying to work with you using this new system. Thank you very much.
Right now, View Specs does have a few other options that we haven't implemented at this time. We're still working on the interface between our office systems and View Specs, but as I said, looking forward to try to use this with some of our contractors to correct simple corrections and save time on both sides. So if you have any questions, I guess I can take a few of those at the time too.
So there's a question in the Q&A from Kimberly MacArthur asking, is this helping inspectors with workload management?
Let's see. At the time, we've used it. A few of the inspectors have tried using it. We are set up a little differently than some other jurisdictions that have full-time inspectors that do video ones. But yes, if we have some that are in remote areas and it's going to take longer to drive there, we have had a few inspectors that has helped with the workload for travel time.
And Ezra Hammer, I'm going to allow you to talk. So if you wanted to unmute yourself, you can ask your question.
Good morning, Andy and Brian. Thanks for sharing that video. You mentioned that this is a technology that's inspector driven. Is this something that an applicant can request or work with their inspector on utilizing?
As far as making the request, like in our normal system, you can put a note in the system asking if we could try to do it this way, but it will be left to the inspectors how comfortable they are with the type of inspection to do it. And so that's where it comes in, is making sure that we do have up-to-date contacts to be able to call whoever's requesting this. But yeah, you're more than welcome to put it in as a comment in there, and we'll do our best to try to see if we can accommodate that.
Thank you.
Other questions for Brian? Going once. Oh, there's one. Oh, that was a thank you. It's a comment.
Well, thank you.
Okay, I think this is something you'll see more in the future. My sense is, oh, I see another question.
Does the video save for records from Alfreda?
It saves, yes, it will. If we do record the video, it will save it. But if we don't actually hit record, it's just a live stream that once we disconnect the call, it is eliminated and it's not saved at any location. It does have the function where we can record a whole thing or just do spot pictures of certain items. But for the most part, I know that the guys that have used it, most of it has just been going around the phone really slowly and showing them the corrections, or sometimes on first time inspections, they've been able to do simple things also.
Other questions? Okay, I had somebody ask me early on whether we can use this to do our own removal of our appendix, and the answer is no. That's not a good use for this video inspection, so we don't have that expertise. So, you good, Brian?
I'm good. And when we're done with the form, if somebody comes up with another question, I'll stay here till the end.
Yeah, great, thank you. I think this is, 5 years from now, we'll have use specs 5.0 or something, and we'll be laughing at what we did now. But, we're just taking baby steps into this technology, and I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
So thanks, Brian.
Yep, no problem. Thank you.
It's now the Teresa Cherniak show, talking about middle housing.
Great, thanks, Andy. So good morning, everyone. I'm Teresa Cherniak, the principal planner in community planning for Washington County. And it's my section primarily that's working on implementation of the House Bill 2001 middle housing legislation that was passed 2 years ago now. Last year was the rulemaking, and we did participate quite a bit in that rulemaking. The rules came out at the end of last year, and we have been working to sort through what we need to do and how we need to do it. And so I'll talk some about that, what the bill and the rules require, and what we've been working on. And we did get some funding from the state to do economic analysis and feasibility study to look at how much middle housing we might expect to get. So I'll talk about some of the findings from that. I thought I was just going to have a short time, so this is a relatively brief PowerPoint. If you have a lot of detailed questions, I might need to switch in some other information, but we'll go through it and see how that goes and what questions you have. So next slide. Just to set a little bit of context and make sure we all understand the same terms. So middle housing has been talked about for a while in planning and development circles, and it's generally considered the range of housing types that are somewhere between what a detached single family home might be and a larger multifamily building. So in the bill itself, it defines it as duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. All of those are on one lot, and then townhouses, which the way they're defined would be attached units on separate lots, and then cottage cluster housing, which is smaller footprint units around a courtyard of some sort. Sometimes people do consider maybe accessory dwelling units as fitting a middle housing definition, but under the bill, duplexes or sorry, ADUs are not included in there. Next slide. So the bill and the rules require that large cities outside of metro and county and cities within metro, so Washington County, Clackamas County, and Multnomah County are the only counties that are subject to the requirements. Throughout the rest of the state, it's just limited to cities and cities over a certain size. So within metro, we have to allow duplexes on each lot or parcel within the UGB where a detached single family home would be allowed. And we need to allow all middle housing types, so all the ones that were on the first slide, in areas within the UGB that we also allow detached dwellings. We can exclude future development land. So in the county, we've been looking at that as being areas in the FD10 and FD20 districts. Those are our kind of urban holding zones or districts within the urban growth boundary. And we can apply some regulations to middle housing within or to implement statewide planning goal protections. So goal 5 is the one that we think particularly is relevant for the county, but there were other statewide goals listed there. Next slide. What we can do is we can continue to allow detached dwellings. So I think there was some concern that this was eliminating all single detached dwellings. It's not. It just allows more options than what might currently be allowed. We can regulate siting and design of middle housing, although there are parameters within the rules on how much of that we can do, how far that can go, but it is allowed. And various people have talked about that in terms of maybe helping for middle housing to fit in with areas that have typically not had it that much. And then we can go beyond what's in the bill and in the rules. So we could allow middle housing in more locations, on smaller lots, that sort of thing. We just can't restrict it more than what's in the bill. And what we must not do is discourage the development of middle housing through unreasonable costs or delay. What constitutes unreasonable cost or delay, I think, was a part of what in the rules, what the state tried to lay out, what they thought was reasonable. And depending on what jurisdictions do, that could end up being something that it is a subject of a lot of conversation through the rulemaking, what might cause unreasonable cost or delay. Next slide. So some highlights on what minimum compliance means. And this is what we based the feasibility study on. is this minimum compliance. Again, we could go further than this, but this is the minimum. So we will be developing regulations to allow any lot that allows a detached dwelling to have a duplex. And generally that also means within the same same parameters as a single dwelling would have. So the same review type and the same kinds of conditions and that sort of thing. For the other types, so for the plexes and the cottage clusters, if we choose to regulate lot size, these are the minimums that that we must allow. So triplex on lots less than or equal to 5,000 square feet, a fourplex on lots greater than or equal to 7,000 square feet, and same with the cottage clusters, the 7,000 square feet. Townhomes have a average minimum lot size, but really they will be regulated based on density. So we can't apply density requirements to these other types, just the lot size requirements. But for townhomes, we can allow it 4 times the maximum density of detached dwellings, or 25 units per acre, whichever is largest or greatest. So in the county's districts, R5 is the lowest density district we have. That allows 4 to 5 units per acre. And so in R5, that's the only district where it would be below the 25 units per acre. So actually, well, so that would be 20 units per acre. But otherwise, we think it's pretty much at the 25 units per acre level. And then parking, the rules are very specific that we can't require more than 1 off-street space per unit for all of the middle housing types. Next slide. So I have a little flow diagram of how we're doing our work and the time frame, and I'll talk about that in a second. But we are really just getting into this right now. We've been educating ourselves, and we have a website up now, and I'll have information on that. So we're in the kind of scoping and getting it all thought through right now as far as what do we need to do. So right now we know the rules set the requirements, and there really is limited discretion in what we can do, but there are some places where we'll have policy choices. So we're starting to outline that and think about what we might recommend on that. And we'll be bringing that forward in different ways, both to, we're looking at our public outreach strategy. We'll also be talking with our planning commission and board about those choices as we move forward. So some of the things we're looking at, first, we're really, our code, if you have worked with it a lot, it's pretty hefty. It's maybe 1,000 pages long. It's quite interconnected. And so we're really going through it with a fine-tooth comb and trying to understand all of our current single-family dwelling requirements, because a lot of what we can apply to middle housing is based on what we apply currently to single-family. With that, we're looking at our current design requirements and the design options that are provided in the model code. And I should say, in another version of this presentation, we go through this a little bit more. There are rules that establish kind of the minimum standards. There is then a model code that recommends specific code language and has design requirements that can be applied. And so we'll be looking at both of those, and there may be parts of the model code that we suggest that we implement or we use to base our regulations on. We're looking at how to address the statewide planning goal areas, particularly goal 5. Last year, we looked really closely, last couple of years, at our significant natural resource regulations and inventory and such. And so we'll be looking at how to address middle housing within those areas. The rules also allow us to do things a little differently for master planned communities. And the way that's defined in the bill, it's we think it's really limited to 2 areas that the county has, North Bethany and Bonnie Slope West. So we're looking closely at what the bill or the rules allow us to do, and we'll be making some recommendations on how we might treat those areas. Particularly, it says that you can limit middle housing if the area hasn't developed yet. And so we're looking at the particulars of that. We also have a number of different studies that either we've done or we've started to do. And so we really need to look at how this relates to those other studies. We looked at our setters and corridors and the capacity, development capacity there. That now shifts with middle housing, so we're needing to rethink that. We had talked about doing a study on infill development, and so we'll fold that into here. We also have gotten a lot of comments about sidewalk gaps and frontage improvements, and our board has told us that they don't want middle housing to make those problems worse. So we'll be looking at that. So those are the kind of things that we just want to make sure that this work folds in and works well with the other work that we've been doing. And then we also, I think we're one of the few districts or few jurisdictions that have on-street parking requirements. So the bill says that we can only allow the rules say that we can only allow or require 1 off-street parking space. It doesn't talk about on-street parking, and so we just need to think about how our current regulations work with that and what to do with that. So no answers on any of these. We're just starting to look at them. Next slide. I mentioned that we got a grant from the Department of Land Conservation and Development to do a feasibility analysis of and a market study of what we expect with our middle housing development in the county. So we hired Eco Northwest to do that work. And the study was focused on looking at what makes middle housing more or less economically feasible to build. So this was about financial or economic feasibility. We also had them look at where within the county, unincorporated Washington County, might middle housing be more or less economically feasible to develop. We have a lot of different communities with very different situations. Different development happened at different times, and some are larger lots, some are smaller lots, some have more vacant lots. The economics are different, so we just wanted them to look across all of those areas and give us a sense of what we might see in the different areas. And then if we have policy choices that the board might be able to make, how might those affect the feasibility of middle housing? And there's a beautiful 60-ish page report on this, and I'll just touch on the findings here, but I would encourage you to take a look at that. We have the executive summary, I think, is on our website. And then if you want to see the whole report, there's also a link for that. Next slide. So the overall observations from the findings are that middle housing is economically feasible in the unincorporated urban area on just a small fraction of the parcels. Again, it varied by sub-area, but anywhere from 0.5% to 7% was what the study found as being economically feasible. So across all of the urban and incorporated area, it was less than 3% of the parcels that would be feasible for middle housing. This, though, was roughly double the percentage of parcels that would be feasible for redevelopment with detached housing. So it's not nothing, but it's also not expected to be something that then will happen everywhere or could happen everywhere. I think most of the potential that they found was on the larger lots. And it was somewhere around the 14,000 square foot lot size where it was most feasible. The average home in a developed subdivision is not likely to redevelop with middle housing. And again, the vacant lots and large lots with lower value homes or manufactured homes or accessory structures were the ones that were most financially feasible. Also, the ownership housing, mostly townhomes, are what appear to be the most feasible as far as a middle housing type, more feasible than the plexes, the duplex, triplex, quadplex, which would be more likely to be a rental unit. Next slide, please. The report also found that the pace of middle housing was expected to be gradual. So not that we would see a lot of this right away. A lot of what is expected is that it might happen more when parcels are sold, and they might be sold to someone with the expectation that that person was going to do a redevelopment. Versus a lot of existing people doing this. One of the things the report didn't look at is conversions, and we weren't sure how to model something like conversions. So we could see conversions, we're not sure how many of those we might see. Another finding was that even where middle housing appears more financially feasible than detached dwellings, the detached may end up being what gets built instead. And maybe this is more for right now versus into the future. And this is a study that was it's kind of a point in time right now. And as this becomes more normal and as more developers get comfortable with it, we may see more. But right now, based on developer experience or housing type preferences, we may still end up seeing more of the detached housing being built. We have been working with our infrastructure providers, so primarily Clean Water Services, the Tualatin Valley Water District, and then the county's transportation staff to think about what might be the impacts of middle housing development on infrastructure. And at this point, mostly what we've heard is that they're not concerned with the amount or kind of level of development that might happen under middle housing, but they do want to monitor it and keep track of it in case certain areas start to take off more than other areas. It may mean that some infrastructure improvements need to be made earlier than were expected. So they just want to keep track of that more. The one place that we have heard a bit that there could be concerns is on some of the local streets that right now aren't built to current standards. And if we get a lot of middle housing on some of those streets, that could make those problems worse. So things like lack of sidewalks, curbs, and drainage. We hear this a lot from community members. And so again, this was something the board asked us to look more into. They don't want the middle housing to make problems worse. So this is a big part of what we're going to be looking at and thinking about during our work. Next slide. The timeline and process then. So that first orange block there, the DLCD rulemaking ended at the end of 2020. The economic analysis and market feasibility study started the middle of last year, and by mid-June, we'll have that complete and we'll have final findings. We're doing some additional work now coming out of our briefings with the board and the Planning Commission. The third line there is our overall work on House Bill 2001. So these other things will fold into our overall work. So right now we're in phase one. We're in the research and analysis, scoping out the project, starting to think about our outreach. We've got a website now up and running, so that includes a lot of information and educational materials for everybody. And we're then thinking through right now what is going to be our outreach strategy. Again, there are limits to what we can do, how much flexibility we have under the rules. There is a bit, and so we're still thinking through what exactly does the outreach, how do we do it, and how do we approach it given that. We do want to make sure that we have equity, diversity, and inclusion principles that we're using throughout that. And we also want to make sure that we are including all the different people potentially affected. And that includes builders, developers, consultants, you folks who work with our regulations all the time. So stay tuned for more on how we'll potentially develop focus groups or an advisory committee of some sort. That should be sorting that through. That should be within the next month or so that we have an outline for how we do that. We'll be then developing code concepts and probably asking for some policy decisions, and then going into code writing. All of that, actually when I did the schedule, it will back up a little bit from what this timeline shows, because I think we probably need to have our code drafts done by mid-December so that we can then go into the adoption process. The deadline for adoption set in the state law is June 30th of 2022. So that's a hard stop. We need to have it. If we don't, then the model code would apply. And so if for some reason we don't get it, that would be the outcome. And we're looking at that too and making sure what's just implications of that, trying to understand implications of that. And the hearings, there'll be Planning Commission and Board of Commissioner hearings, and the board would be the one to adopt it. So with that, I will stop, and I would be happy to answer any questions. Oh, and these are the staff on it. So Kim Armstrong and Ann Kelly are the kind of co-project managers on this. And then we also have Todd Workowitz and potentially other staff working on it. So it's the biggest project that we have going on in our section. We'll also have transportation planning staff working with us on the frontage improvement questions and the parking questions and other aspects of it. And then this is the website that we have now. So it'd be great if you check that out and let us know if you have any thoughts.
Thanks, Teresa. I see one question, which you can take a stab at. Then it's 9:30 right now, so I'd like to move on, but I think some of the questions at the end of the forum might have to do with this. So why don't you go for that one question and then.
Sure, and it looks more like it's a statement, and I think we understand that. So Matt Newman says, I've found that the on-street parking requirement is one of the more difficult requirements to meet on middle density projects. It seems like this on-street parking issue and just calculating density for implementing this bill will be very difficult. And I think you're right, Matt, and it's one of the challenges that we'll be working on. And if you have thoughts on it, we would welcome thoughts as well.
Okay. Like I said, we may have some time for questions at the end. This is something you're going to hear a lot about over the next year and a half. So feel free to get engaged with Teresa and her staff, because it'll be something new and different for all of us here once we adopt the new rules. Okay, I'm gonna talk a little bit about kind of budget and impacts on service and things like that. So right now, I don't know, 95% of the business that we're providing is not in person. It's either through Excella or Project Docs or phone calls or emails. As of today, the lobby is open Monday through Thursday for in-person questions and helping you out. We are closed Fridays right now. I do anticipate that will stay for a while. With COVID, who knows, we may shut down again. I don't know. But assuming we don't, or in a few months we are opening back up, I still anticipate that Friday we might not be open for a while. As many of you know, kind of the boom years or at least the most recent wave of boom years that was sort of between maybe 2013 and 2018 is over. We've seen revenues being less than our expenditures since about 2018. So we've started having budget issues for the past few years. As many of you may know, but some of you might not know, that the county current planning and building is almost entirely fee supported, which has sort of been the policy of the board historically for 30 or 40 years at the county. So we have different challenges than I think other cities, at least in Washington County, who subsidize some of those programs. So if we're not generating revenue through fees, we end up with budget issues. And what that means is, since both current planning and building are almost entirely all the expenses are for people, it impacts the number of people we can have. So just for example, over the last year, I think current planning has averaged losing about $40,000 a month, and building has lost about $240,000 a month. The good news is building did break even last month. So we have seen some uptick, and hopefully that'll continue on once we look at the April numbers. Current planning has lost a couple of people that we didn't replace, and then we had to transfer a couple of people. Building, we had a early retirement program set in place that a few people took advantage of. So we're down 3 inspectors. I do want to mention one specifically. So Jay Winchester, who was the inspector supervisor for a long time. He was one of the folks who took advantage of that program. So we'll be actually, while we're not looking to go external. We will likely hire somebody internally to take that position, but we probably won't backfill that position anytime shortly if it's taken by somebody internally. What more can I say? So right now we're kind of in the middle of the budget season with the board. So there's been a lot of different things that have been talked about. Kind of on the fee side, clearly if we raise fees, that's one way to get more revenues. But clearly we are in kind of a not ideal economic climate right now. So the downside of raising fees when the economy isn't good is something that certainly the board has been informed and they know about. So I'm not sure how that's going to come out. They've certainly sent us signals that they're not jumping up and down about raising fees. And then outside revenue is another thing that has been talked about just as at least for a one-time sort of help to both sections. So that's been talked about too. Obviously the downside is there's a lot more competition for that outside revenue right now. That while we may be the so-called canary in the coal mine, to use an expression of being the leaders to experience some of these problems before the rest of the departments in the county. You know, the county is starting to feel the impact too on general fund revenue. So we're certainly competing for funds if the board did ultimately decide to help us out. So don't have a lot of answers right now on more revenue sources outside of more activity. I do want to mention there's over the next year, we'll be kind of doing a sustainable service study to kind of look at both sections going forward to see if we can avoid getting in this situation in the future, which will look at kind of the services we provide and the different way to fund different service levels. More practically, I want to talk about kind of what's going on with staff, or at least the direction they've had. If you apply, give us your money for a permit, you can expect that we're going to process your permit and we're going to do it as timely as we can. That still is the focus of the work in both current planning and building. So we're still shooting to do things as quickly as possible. We are starting to have some backup in plan review, and building inspections has challenges because of the less inspectors, and frankly at the permit tech level, shifting over to Excella and doing almost everything online has been a challenge. And on the current planning side, you know, again, we have the statutory requirements for processing permits in X amount of time. So we're still gonna shoot to meet those. The things that we may not do that we previously did was helping folks get applications together, that things that we did for free, answering questions and things like that before the fact, we may not do as quickly as we did before, knowing that there's a lot of consultants out there that can perhaps do similar things. We're going to push land use applications to pre-applications. If you really do have questions you need to sit down and figure out before you apply, we're going to push you towards a pre-app, and a lot of things that are ultimately a land use decision that we can't maybe give you the certainty that you might want. We're going to say that's what the land use process is for answering. And on the building side, I would encourage you to submit good plans. We cumulatively, there's a big impact to having plans that aren't, that sometimes are submitted just so you can start the process that we spent a lot of time going back and forth on. That doesn't really help. You know, it's one of those things where privately, you might benefit from it, but if everyone's doing that, we're all kind of losing out. So we're encouraging folks to submit as high quality plans initially as you can, knowing that, you know, we are here to answer some questions that have expertise that others don't, and that's why you have to get permits. See, there's 5 questions there that I haven't looked at, so I think that's the end of my spiel.
I'd like to start with Ezra because he rose his hand up with the middle housing, and then we can move to the written questions.
Go for it, Ezra.
Sure. Thanks, Andy. A couple of questions here. Did I hear you correctly that can you maybe provide a little bit more clarity on staffing numbers? I didn't quite understand in your presentation if we're going to see a downtick in existing, if you're just in the process of not replacing folks as there's natural attrition, or if there's going to be a more targeted plan. And you kind of alluded to outside resources, but can you kind of explain a little bit more what that means? Is there going to be a request to the Board of County Commissioners for budget funds? Is LUT seeking a specific dollar amount? And if so, how many staff would that help maintain? It would be helpful for the development community to understand kind of what LUT is looking for from the board so that we could support those efforts.
There was 13 questions there. I might be able to remember 4 of them, but we're hoping not to reduce any more staff, but it's a function of activity level. We have asked the board to look at both fee increases and providing outside revenue. And they've entertained that. We're kind of in a interesting timing right now where I think over this next week, the CAO actually gives the board the recommended budget. So I haven't seen what is in there specifically. But I think that document will be available over the next week or two. And that's the document that other folks, if they want to comment, should be commenting on, is the draft budget. So I know I have been a little bit vague, but we don't plan to reduce staff right now. We're hopeful that we have a plan going forward where we won't have to do that. On the other hand, we're not anticipating adding staff anytime shortly. So clearly, in terms of the amount of work per staff person, it's pretty high right now. Other questions here?
So from Josh Carrillo, can you provide a date and more information on Washington County's bond offerings? Also, any update on new home funds from the recently passed stimulus? Maybe Matt Craigie.
Yeah, maybe Matt. I can talk a little bit about the home funds. I think that's one area that the board has looked at as a possibility to help us out, but I don't know if there's any commitments on that. If Matt's still here and has some other information on this question, that's great.
I am still here. So if I heard correctly, the question is about the county's ARPA allocation and supporting LUT. Is that correct?
I believe so. It says, can you provide a date and more information on Washington County's bond offerings? Also, any update on the new home funds from the recently passed stimulus?
Oh, okay. Well, I can speak to the American Rescue Plan work that we're doing. I think that might be separate from bond. That is separate from bond funds, and that might be related to some of the housing work that's going on. So I can't speak to that. So what I can say about the ARPA work is that the county is working right now to develop a framework for thinking about how those dollars, the county's allocation gets allocated, gets dispersed. And we hope to publish that and get that out for review to the greater community here over the next few weeks. We're also working in coordination with local partners, so local cities. And again, I'm doing outreach to community-based organizations and to private businesses to understand the needs there, as well as working with the state and legislators about the state's allocation, how they intend to deploy that. So I think that's not completely related to the question at hand. Again, I can't answer the housing bond question specifically. So maybe someone else, I don't know if someone's from housing is on the call, could do that.
It's the
I saw Comey earlier, but it looks like Comey may be gone. So
yeah. Let's take note of that and get back to the individual.
got it.
Um,
So the next one would be from Kimberly MacArthur. Can you share what your turnaround times are for SFR, commercial structures, and accessory dwelling units?
well, I assume this is a building question. So I think that we're at about 2 to 4 weeks for single family in terms of the initial plan review, and like 3 to 5 weeks for commercial. ADUs, I assume, are in that initial single family. But there's also the site plan review that you need. From current planning, we did have a little bit of a log jam there a couple months ago that I think we have done a better job of clearing up. So I think we're within a month on all of the site plan reviews now. Drake Bush. So maybe the general fund question. So current planning gets a little bit of general fund from mainly for code enforcement, but the community planning section and long range planning is a combination of video lottery and general fund funding. So there is general fund that goes for the long range plannings. It's the current planning function that's historically been subsidized. Historically has not been subsidized at all. God knows the industry doesn't ask for this level of regulation. Interesting comment. If questions are pushed to pre-application conferences, the scheduling timeline needs to be prompt. I think that's a good point. We'll note that. Let's see. Is there another open one here? No more open questions. How are we on
There
time
is Ezra
now?
who rose his hand back up. So Ezra, if you'd like to mute yourself.
Sorry, I can't help myself here, Andy. You're
That's
just
all right.
you're just too engaging. Can you
That was sarcastic, I know.
No, I'm kidding, Andy. Is it, has the county entertained the idea at all of helping bring on or allowing applicants to hire third-party consultants to handle either reviews or inspections in situations where the county isn't able to meet its desired time limits? You mentioned having recently got through a significant backlog. That being said, I think many in the development community are still concerned about timelines, both on the planning and building side. And I'm sure folks would be happy to pick up the tab if it was an option to bring on third parties.
I think we still have an existing contract with an outside service in building that we used, 3 or 4 years ago, primarily for engineering. So that is an option that we have if we find things get out of control. We haven't done that in current planning. Part of it because we haven't figured out how we would pay for that, frankly. But part of my comment before was encouraging you to have a good consultant team with your applications before the fact that can help. So I think it's something we would explore in current planning if we could figure out kind of the math of can we hire them to do it cheaper than us. But I think those questions certainly come up more as we come out of recession. So that would be from our perspective, a good problem to have. It means that there's more work coming in outside of the site plan review, which we just had some internal glitches that we had to figure out. I don't see problems with land use applications getting to the point where we're not going to process them in time. We might get that point, and if that happens and we're actually getting so overwhelmed, looking outside is a possibility, but we'd probably hire more staff before we got to that point, I would think, on the current planning side. Other questions out there? We're at 9:53. Are there other just general questions that anybody has not related to budget issues? Okay, well, as you may have already noted, October 28th is our next forum, and you have hopefully the information here on how to contact Steph with other questions that we didn't answer today or we didn't get around to, and we'll do our best to answer those. So thank you for showing up, and we'll see you in 6 months, hopefully, and many of you we will see before then, undoubtedly. So thank you.